When you think of the most fair games ever made, you would probably think of something like chess. It gives both players the same pieces mirrored on the same places on the board. So each player is essentially given the same amount of resources and same opportunities for victory. Most competitive games also use the same philosophy in their design. It wouldn't make sense if one team had an unfair advantage over another. Although, I am aware that the player with white pieces starts first, which is the only mild source of asymmetry in the game, which provides little to no advantage, but besides that, every other part of the game is as balanced and fair as possible. And yeah, that's fun, I love a level playing field. But after a while, you start to desire more than just that formula. What if I played in 4D? What if I played with 4 players? What if I played against checkers? What if you had a shotgun? There's all kinds of ways to spice up a multiplayer game to make it fresh, and that's where asymmetrical gameplay comes in. How do you balance a game where, depending on the team or opponent, you have different tools or resources at your disposal? It's surprising that games like this are more balanced than what you might think it would be on paper. And they all have different solutions to the same problem. If you've ever played a team-based shooter, or played a game with a payload game mode, you're probably somewhat familiar with this concept. Although the degree of asymmetry varies from game to game, some making the teams more different than others. A set of games that are well known for being asymmetrical are the Counterstrike series and its inspirations. The T side, I don't want to get a strike from YouTube, have weapons that do more damage than the CT side, with their main gun having the ability to one-shot headshot enemy players while the CT's main weapon does not. Their flammable grenade also has a larger range too. This seems to lean heavily in favor of the T side, which makes it seem unfair, but context matters. And within the context of the game's most popular game mode, Defuse, it's actually pretty balanced. CT side has to play defensively since the T side has the bomb, so even though the T side has the advantage of firepower, if the T side plants the bomb and the CT side defuses it, then the CT side automatically wins. The CT side also has the positional advantage, and their weapons are slightly more accurate than the T side. Even though the difference mechanically between the teams are negligible, it gives an interesting dynamic, where one side will use their unique strengths and weaknesses to gain an upper hand over the other, which makes it seem more tangible, because that's often the case for actual conflicts outside of games. That just leaves one question though. What if the difference is very significant? Well, there are a couple ways to alleviate that. Social deduction games are perfect for demonstrating what I mean. One team is vastly outnumbered with a different set of goals than the other, so being on these teams will feel very different mechanically. But thanks to the principles of some old book, what would seem to be a battle of impossible odds at first instead becomes a battle of wits, deception, and manipulation. There are so many variations of the social deduction game, but in almost every variation of this type of game, there will be the key piece that holds everything together and brings it closer to a 50-50 chance of either team winning. The chaos and uncertainty of who is the spy in Spyfall or the imposter in Among Us leads to people making incorrect assumptions, which can give them an opportunity to further sow distrust and even frame someone. In Valve's Left 4 Dead, they would introduce an alternative game mode called Versus Mode, where you can either play as survivors or special infected. At first glance, it may seem that the survivors have an unfair advantage because they have more health, they can heal back health, and they have vastly superior DPS. Besides letting the special infected team respawn over and over again, the unique way that they make it balanced is that instead of playing on the same team the entire game, you actually switch sides every chapter of each campaign. and it ends up being a competition of whoever can make it the furthest to earn the most points and win. So both teams end up having equal opportunity to win, even though the game mode is asymmetrical. The studio that originally came up with the idea for Left 4 Dead before development was transferred over to Valve, Turtle Rock Studios, has made multiple attempts at making games with asymmetrical modes such as Evolve, which sounded really cool on paper, but in execution it didn't turn out that way. A game about a team of 4 players against one other player on the enemy team playing an ever-evolving monster sounds cool. But one of the reasons why Evolve had failed was because of poor matchmaking. Teams of hunters would end up not communicating with each other, or there would be a huge skill disparity inside the team. So the monster would end up steamrolling the hunter's team. I believe this came as a result of the monster side only having one person, so the only person's skill you can rely on is yourself, and you cannot miscommunicate with yourself. It's pretty sad seeing the fate of Evolve be like this, considering the fact that the game has a die-hard fan base, and a few more design changes would have made the game more popular on launch. In a similar vein, Turtle Rock Studios' other game, Back 4 Blood, had experienced complaints of the game not having a campaign versus mode. Instead, it would have an equivalent to the survival versus mode in Left 4 Dead. You can tell by the comments under the video where they reveal this information that people were not happy about this, because survival versus mode is not as balanced as campaign versus mode, as I previously showed how.
The main game's co-op. This is the first PvP that you guys have really talked about. Is there more, or is this the only mode that you're focusing on for PvP?
Oh, this is it for launch. This is our PvP for launch. Yeah.
Cool.
Speaking of zombie games, the Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare series plus Battle for Neighborville are some other asymmetrical multiplayer games. Based on the single-player tower defense game, there was actually some asymmetrical game mode on the console ports of Plants vs. Zombies, where you could play as the zombies, which probably inspired the same thing in Garden Warfare. Despite the game's genre being completely different to the predecessors, the game's mechanics transfer really well and lead to a game that's actually pretty fun, and literally adds a new dimension to the Plants vs. Zombies series. There's not really much to say here that would add anything new that I haven't brought up before, but I thought I might as well bring it up since people would complain if I didn't bring it up. It's a pretty popular game with an asymmetrical multiplayer game mode, although it does seem like the community agrees that the zombie side are objectively more powerful than the plants, so that shows a bit of the downside of the asymmetrical format, due to how hard it is to balance teams. To bring back Evolve, one trope about it that I see prominent in these types of games are when there is a singular person on one team as some stronger monster that the rest have to defeat. Evolve may have failed with this format, but that doesn't mean other games haven't. Dead by Daylight has the same format, yet it has seen much more success and notoriety compared to Evolve. There's also a lot of counterplay against the opposing sides, which Evolve didn't seem to have, which I think contributed to how well the game did. I find that this way of setting up a game can also make a story more understandable at first glance, at least for a conflict. When you see gameplay of Dead by Daylight, you can understand it's inspired by slasher movies, and even if you don't know the lore of Dead by Daylight, you can still understand that a bunch of survivors are trying to escape a monster. In a non-symmetrical game, if you have 2 teams of military dudes in different uniforms, and there isn't any relation to any real-life conflict, there could be a bunch of reasons why they could be fighting. So just by looking at gameplay, you could not tell what story is happening and why they are fighting. When asymmetry is introduced, it sort of guides the player into developing something resembling a story in their head. In Rainbow Six Siege, you can tell that it's supposed to be a SWAT team. And finally, to close things off, for whatever reason, there are a lot of Source Engine games that tend to have a bunch of asymmetrical game modes tied to them. In Gmod, there are a bunch of them, some leaking into other games, even a social deduction game. Due to the nature of being a mod of Half-Life 2, Gmod inherited the game's physics engine and led to a lot of creativity in taking advantage of it. In Prop Hunt, it's basically a game of hide and seek, but the seekers have guns, and the hiders can turn into any physics prop. There is also my personal favorite game mode of Zombie Survival. All players start out as survivors, but one player will be randomly selected to turn into a zombie. The rest will then have to survive every round by building up barricades with props and nails, whilst also fending off the hordes of zombies with guns. As people die, they become zombies, mutating and getting stronger and stronger each round. At the time of writing this video, there aren't that many new games with asymmetrical game modes out there, so I thought that this video could inspire a few people to encourage them to make some more. I wanted to spark some fresh ideas out there for games. There are some honorable mentions I didn't go into depth about, either because I didn't have enough knowledge to talk about, or didn't have time to talk about, like Gorilla Tag, versus Saxton Hale, Dungeon Land, and many others. Even though I think the balance can be a bit finicky, and games like this will absolutely require more effort to make, they are often a lot of fun if gameplay isn't meant to be anything hyper-competitive. As Reggie of Nintendo once said,
"If it's not fun, why bother?"
Anyway, if you like this video and want to see more, like, share, and subscribe. It helps my channel out in the algorithm. If you support me on my Patreon in the description below, you can vote on upcoming videos. See ya.